You're listening to the Mike Eckford Show on CKNW News Talk 980. And of course, you know that Boughton Law is CKNW's on-air legal analyst for 2015. And they join us on air to give us the information on legal solutions in life, but also in business as well. And they also join us on occasion to explain the legal implications behind some of the biggest stories that we cover. And of course, the discussion I'm about to have does not constitute legal advice. Want to make that very clear for everybody. Now, what we're going to talk about today is cross-border travel. Now, there's a personal aspect to that, but there's also a business aspect to that. If you are running a business that does some of your operations or do some of your operations in the United States of America, there are a lot of things that you should know and some things that are being consistently updated. Saba Nakvi joining us from Boughton Law. Hi, Saba. How are you?
Great, Mike. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you. Now, first of all, you are a rare bird in the legal profession and also in the area of immigration because you hold license in Canada and the U.S.
Yep, that license to Canada and the U.S. Allows me to practice both U.S. and Canadian law in BC.
Now, how beneficial is that when it comes to giving people advice when it comes to their business? Because we see so many business, obviously in BC, that have operations or at least have business contacts in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a great tool because I can help businesses and individuals navigate the border. We as British Columbians, we live so close to the border, and not only do we travel for pleasure often, but a lot of us travel for business reasons.
And how surprised are people when the system changes and they don't know that the system has changed? I mean, we've seen some incredible changes technologically, but also just in terms of the culture of our border and how it works since 9/11, this new reality that we all live in. How fluid are the changes when it comes to the immigration policy between Canada and the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, the changes take place, and you're right, the security issues are paramount. And I mean, there are also changes that want to increase the economic competitiveness between Canada and the U.S. So the most recent change was effective June of last year. Canada and the U.S. have entered into an agreement where they will share all entry information and exit information of all travelers hitting the borders.
Oh, Saba. So that means, obviously, and once again, it's because security is paramount, but now there is that communication, which means if people have been, I don't want to say lying, but if they've been stretching the boundaries of what is legal in terms of their business travel, this could create some issues.
Absolutely, because now when people approach the border, the immigration officer is going to know exactly how many days a person's been spending in the U.S. So if they're a regular business traveler, if they travel for 1 or 2 days at a time, a few times a year, that's usually not an issue. But if a business traveler is spending a few weeks or even months at a time, they're definitely going to have a lot more scrutiny at the border.
So how fluid are the rules in terms of what you have to declare and what you don't? I mean, where does it stand? Is there an easy way to answer that?
The best thing to do is always be honest, because if you think that your activities are business, I mean, probably they are, but in some cases, you might actually need a work permit. And if that is the case, the best thing to do is be honest, because if you do need a work permit, you have the ability to come back better prepared.
So let's break down the work permit a little bit and
Sure.
What requires a work permit versus what doesn't. I mean, if you're going down to have a meeting with a prospective client, that doesn't, right?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. And under the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, there is a distinct difference. So a business visitor is allowed to enter for a business meeting, as you said. A business visitor can also attend a conference or a trade show and can even negotiate in sales on behalf of their Canadian employer. Now, for a work permit, the work definition is when someone enters the U.S. to provide services to a U.S. entity for which they're getting paid. And a good way to look at it, Mike, and this is what the officers look at, is this person who wants to enter the U.S. possibly going to take a job away from a U.S. citizen.
That's the litmus test.
Exactly.
So how complicated is it for a company or even for an individual to get a work permit to do that in the U.S., to actually work for a U.S. entity? Well,
the good news is that if you are a Canadian citizen, and it doesn't apply to permanent residents, but for Canadian citizens under NAFTA, there's a few categories that actually allow for facilitated processing of work permits at the border on your way to work. So that's a great way for Canadians to get work permits if they qualify. And some examples of categories are, firstly, there's the NAFTA professionals category. So the list of NAFTA professionals is in the agreement and has professions such as accountants, architects, management consultants is a common one. Oh. So if you fall within that list, and if you're going to be providing those kinds of duties in the States, then you could get a work permit.
I think that surprises a lot of people, that it is, and maybe that's what keeps people from doing it properly, is there's this idea that it's far more complicated than in fact it is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, people shy away from the process, or they assume that they probably won't qualify. But in fact, there are some categories that a lot of us could fall into.
Saba, what are the repercussions of not doing this properly? I mean, if you go in there and you actually, get caught providing a service to a U.S. entity that you haven't applied for a work permit for, what happens?
Yeah, if you get caught providing unauthorized work in the U.S., it's a big negative, Mike. So,
speaking like a lawyer, that would be a big negative.
Yeah, so we don't want to do that. We want to be prepared in advance. And if you're dealing with a U.S. company that has offices in the U.S., chances are they're working with Canadians, and they can probably lead you in the right direction. So maybe talk to the HR person there and, ask them, like, how do you deal with Canadians providing services?
Very nice. All right, we're speaking with Saba Nakvi from Boughton Law. We're going to continue after this, and we've talked a little bit about the business. We've got a couple things we'll wrap up there, but also the personal as well. As you're traveling into the U.S., a lot of people get tripped up by some of the questions they get at the border, or if they've had a pardon in the past, what do they declare, what don't they declare, and if you do get in trouble, who do you talk to? What are the steps? We'll talk about that next with Boughton Law on CKNW News Talk 980.
Get connected with Vancouver. Follow at CKNW on Twitter.
You're listening to the Mike Eckford Show on CKNW News Talk 980. Boughton Law is CKNW's on-air legal analysis. I'm going to call them the team because there's a whole bunch of different areas of expertise. They're joining us throughout the year to give us information on legal solutions in business and in life. We were just talking about cross-border travel, and we really focused on business in the first half with Saba Nakvi, but we wanted to turn it to the personal as well. Now, Saba, you must see people come in all the time that have had either trouble at the border, or they have trouble that they're worried about before they cross a border.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. There's so many people that, have issues at the border and come to me, or they just want to find out. They're like, look, am I doing the right thing, or do I need more information?
So what happens, and you hear people talk about this all the time, if people have a criminal record, every time we talk about cross-border shopping or something else, someone phones and says, well, I can't do that because I've got a criminal record. What do you do if you have a criminal record or in the past? How does that...
Yeah, so the criminal record could affect your entry to the U.S. or it might not. So a simple example is, for the United States, a DUI is not a big deal.
Okay.
But for Canada, it is.
Do you have to declare that, though? I mean, when you're crossing the border and they ask you, a specific question, do you have to say, well, I've got a DUI?
Yeah, if they ask you, have you ever been arrested, then you have to be honest. So, don't say no. And a lot of people think that if they have a pardon for an offense in Canada, that they don't have to answer yes to that question. But in reality, they do.
So does it make it easier? So you have to if you have a pardon, you have to say that you have this past criminal offense, or do you have paperwork that you have to have showing the pardon?
You don't necessarily need the paperwork, because if you have been arrested for the states, it's either a crime involving a controlled substance. So it's important to note, Mike, that you don't need a conviction. You could have just admitted smoking marijuana, and that could make you inadmissible to the U.S.
How often do people get tripped up or barred entry from the U.S. just simply for lying or for just acting a little sketchy, like just acting like they might be lying?
It's a problem, because if you are cited for a misrepresentation at the border, then you could be banned from entering the U.S. for 5 years, or it just could be on your record, and you might never get into the U.S., to be honest. For
a misrepresentation.
That's correct.
So how do you behave at the border?
Be nice.
Really? Well, and it makes sense, right? I mean, a lot of these people are just trying to do their job. So if you're pleasant and you're answering honestly, it allows them to do their job.
Absolutely. And yeah, like you said, be honest, because, it might be uncomfortable. It might be embarrassing if you're honest, but at least there's a remedy. So it's not the end of the world. If you do have, if you're inadmissible for a crime, so controlled substances is one, or a crime involving dishonesty, for example, like a theft charge or conviction, then you can come back home, you can prepare an application for a waiver, send it away, and, you're going to show that, look, I did have this incident that happened, but I'm a good person. Yeah. And chances are you'll be approved to enter.
What about going back to the business side of it, the idea of a work permit if you have a prior offense in Canada? Does that bar you from being able to get a work permit for the U.S.?
You can still get a work permit if you have a waiver. So they go hand in hand. So if you have a criminal conviction and if you get a waiver, then you can get a work permit for that duration of time. I mean, the negative is, and a lot of Canadians are frustrated by this, that a waiver is not something that goes on indefinitely. You're going to need to renew it every few years.
Right.
And unfortunately there is a hefty processing fee of about $585 US every time you apply. But, you can still have the ability to travel.
Well, and I'm sure most people's businesses are worth more than $580 every couple of years if you amortize that over the life of your business. Can I ask you one last question? Who should be applying for a Nexus pass? I mean, a lot of people don't, I think, because they don't understand the system. But it's obviously a great tool for people if they're crossing the border regularly.
It is a great tool because it makes travel a lot easier. And Nexus holders are referred to as trusted travelers. So they're screened beforehand. But if someone does have a criminal conviction, or even if they've, had an immigration violation in the past, then they very well might be denied for Nexus.
And once you have that Nexus, you better act on the straight and narrow.
You better be a very, very good person. I mean, don't even take an apple to the border without declaring it, because I've seen people have that the Nexus taken away because they found an apple.
So once you've got that Nexus, you're on the straight and narrow forever and ever. Saba Naqvi, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, Mike. Thank you so much.
Saba Naqvi from Boughton Law, of course, our on-air legal analyst. And this discussion does not constitute legal advice. Please keep that in mind. And at the end of the interview, please, or if you want to listen to this again, you can go to the Boughton Law page on our website for more information. That's cknw.com/Boughton Law. We've got on the Mike Eckford Show on CKNW News Talk 980.